class for undergraduate. They're in the fourth semester, and this is Mr. Arpan, who has worked in various think tanks in like class and this online platform called The Pearls, where you can also contribute if your piece is accepted, of course, on different topics. It can be on South Asia, it can be the editor over there as well. And his primary research area is law warfare and state responses. So today he'll be talking about India and counter insurgency operations. So things will range from Northeast to Kashmir to other different conflicts that India has been facing or is going to face also. So let's welcome Mr. Arpan, and Mr. Arpan, it's up to you, over to you now. Okay.
Am I audible to everyone?
Yes. Yes.
So very good afternoon, everyone, and I hope all of you are doing really well. And so firstly, I would like to thank Professor Manoj and the university for giving me this opportunity to present on this topic. And it specifically coincides with my area of doctoral research. And so today I will be talking about counter-insurgency, counter-terrorism, rule of law, and the state response to lawfare. So before we jump into this whole topic, we have to understand a few things as to how roots of understand about the root of conflicts. And therefore, in understanding of counterinsurgency or counterterrorism, it is of utmost importance. So the first, in the past, has been seen that, human needs have been one of the most important aspects of any conflict, and human needs such as deprivation of individuals, access to certain objects or certain places, or you may even call that economies, that hyperinflation and quality of life and participation in socio-political events are some of the motivating factors for joining or being part of any conflict. Like for instance, you must have also heard about Arab Spring. So in Arab Spring, unemployment was one of the most important reasons for one of the important reasons, and the way how authoritarian regimes were working, that also triggered by the death of an individual, and this started a spree of revolutions across different states in Arab, and that's why we know it as the Arab Spring. And there may also be different political reasons to assume power or to access power. And these are one of the few aspects of, how individual or a human being participates in a conflict. And also that, conflicts are a result of interaction between different individuals, different religion or different culture, values and interests. And if you must already know about, is that the Israel-Palestine conflict, which still continues after so many years. And one of the most important things that is at the root of the conflict is the strong religious and the cultural values of both the civilization. So therefore, it is very important to look into any conflict or any insurgency or anything like that through a lens of understanding why there has been a problem at the start. And you must have also seen different aspects such as Mahatma Gandhi or Martin Luther King or Nelson Mandela, who ended the hostilities of hostility and violence. And you must have also heard about the water revolution in Hong Kong against a specific National Security Act. So you have to understand that everything has a reason, like a conflict always has a reason behind it. And therefore, in this particular slide, I shall be specifically be talking about why and what is terrorism at first. Before going for counter-terrorism or counter-insurgency, you have to understand what terrorism is at the start. So it has always been an important agenda for the United Nations to understand and to define as to what terrorism is, because terrorism is difficult, and terrorism is difficult to understand first of all, And secondly, it is complex and multifaceted phenomena, and that can take different forms, and it has various actors involved in it with different motives and different tactics through which terrorism is being spread. And the whole uh, term of terrorism carries a very political and a moral connotation. Like in the past, it was being used against kings. It was being used against tyrant regimes, and so that whole connotation has come from that. And there are different groups in every countries which may use it for their own purpose, either to legitimize their actions or to discredit their opponents. So the two most important aspects that I would be covering, or I will be talking through and through all these slides, is I will be trying to explain the legitimacy part and the discrediting the opponent part, because that will also carry through at the end of uh, the presentation. So United Nations Security Council, the resolution 1566 of the 2004, it specifically tries to define what terrorism is. And while many nations, have attempted to, define what terrorism is, but they cannot agree specifically to what the specific definition should be, because there is difference in regional context, there is difference in political, legal, and the different cultural context as well. And some nations may emphasize that the use of violence against civilians as justified, while others may include that as a state-sponsored terrorism or political violence by non-state actors. So some nations may have certain views that resistance or insurgency or as legitimate, while others may not consider it as others may consider it as a terrorism. So there is an inherent doubt between what terrorism is and what insurgency is, and this is due to the lack of the consensus on the definition of what terrorism is. And it has certain implications as well, because we are not able to we are not able to have international cooperations and counterterrorism efforts. Although at this point of time, a group of countries, we are at this point of time are bringing together efforts. Therefore, achieving such a definition is a challenging task at the start. And it also requires something what I believe is the careful balance between what is respecting the diversity of perspective and to ensure in specific the effectiveness of what countermeasures that we are taking. And therefore, according to my understanding, I do believe that terrorism it has three most important aspects. First is to disorient. It is to create fear, sow a sense of insecurity for the civilians or for the government. The second would be to get a targeted response. So whenever a terrorist organization strikes, they are the first to claim, see that we have done this particular terrorist attacks. You must have seen it after 9/11. You must have seen it after 26/11, and all these terrorist attacks. There has always been response. So you get in the eyes of the government, and there is always a reprisal from the government part as well, and therefore you also get recognition. When a government looks at you, they can consider that yes, this party has done this, and therefore they are giving recognition to that particular. So they are getting a targeted response to the whole aspect. And the third is to gain legitimacy. Manipulating, getting into agitations and and bringing in your ideology or pushing in your ideology. So terrorism is a way of strategic communications through which parties use violence in order to create fear. So all of you must have or definitely heard about the case of Burhan Wani in Jammu Kashmir. He was a 21-year-old Hizbul Mujahideen's terrorist who was been killed in an encounter because he was involved in a lot of anti-national activities. and also recruiting and creating terrorism throughout the valley. So yes, these are the aspects that one should look at when you're looking at terrorism per se. Now, in this third slide, I will be talking about what insurgency can be termed as, and I do believe that it is a form of what you call a political violence and armed conflict that involves non-state actors who are challenging the authority. So terrorism can be between cross borders, can be between countries, can be between, can get across borders, but insurgency on the other hand is more local. And in order to understand that, you must have already read about the Northeast insurgency or the Khalistani insurgency. And so these are the way of how, insurgency can be termed. And, it involves in specific non-state actors also who are challenging the authority of the government or any power. So it can be characterized in specific and legal terms as, protracted, low intensity conflict in which insurgents seek to undermine or overthrow the established government in power. So insurgents can use a variety of tactics, including guerrilla warfare or sabotage or using propaganda or to terrorize the local. So the conflict may be rooted as similar to terrorism in definitely the political, economic, and social, or even ethnic grievance, as we have seen in Northeast, and which is these issues for an insurgency to rise. These issues has to be deeply ingrained, and it becomes difficult to resolve such problems in countries across the globe. And insurgency can be found in many regions around the world. um, you must have seen prominent features, as they are at this point of time a very prominent feature of contemporary conflicts. And we can see it in the examples of Iraq. We have seen that in the example of Afghanistan and Syria at this point, are some of the current examples of insurgency per se. And insurgency can lead to a lot of humanitarian consequences as well, because it leads to displacement, human rights abuse, and loss of life as well. And we have seen that consistently, that the Syrian refugee was one of the largest refugees in the last 2 to 3 years, that they have fled away from their own country, or they were forced to leave their own country due to the protracted insurgencies. So these insurgencies can have a broader regional specifically, but global implications as well. And this would include, what we have seen as destabilization of an entire region. And we have also seen the effective responses to insurgencies, and which requires a comprehensive approach. We have seen that in India. We have seen a failed case in Afghanistan as well, and successful resolution of such insurgencies often require settlement between parties. And Rashtra Rifles, which are one of the CICT forces, special forces, they specifically are one of the prime are paramilitary forces, which was raised only for this purpose in India in specific. So we can term it as a power asymmetry between government and belligerent groups, and they may have a difference in their objective, as they are against a specific motive or against the state political machine. The second is their target audience is very different. Target audience includes local support, limited area, and they specifically believe in ideological communications. Insurgency, for an insurgency to develop, one needs to have local support. We have seen that in the support. We have seen that in Punjab when the Khalistani insurgency arose. We have seen that in Northeast. But insurgency per se has its own latency periods as well. Like for terrorism, you don't need to have that. But for insurgency, we need to specifically look at these particular aspects. And before we move on to the previous to the next slide, uh, we have seen in the past as well that U.S. Special Forces, they came to India. They have been training in India in order to before they get deployed in Afghanistan, because of the simple reason that they wanted to understand what counterinsurgency or counterterrorism is and how to operate in such scenarios. So until 1955, India never had to understand. Until 1953, we never had insurgency per se. After 1954, this whole insurgency in the Northeast started, and we decided in 1970s that we need to raise a special force which specifically deals with these kind of operations, because an army is a blunt force. Army cannot be used in such situations such as what do you call we cannot be brought into conflicts such as urban warfare. It specifically it has to we have to specifically understand that. So the whole Rashtra rifles, the 18 Rashtra rifles, and in Jammu Kashmir, they still operate. In Northeast and in Punjab, we have removed. So these are how they have been dealing with scenarios. And so this is a timeline that I would like you all to have an understanding of as to how gradually AFSPA was being removed. You have to understand that law in specific, legal AFSPA was Armed Forces Special Powers Act. It specifically was brought in Northeast during the time of 1970s, and it was applied everywhere. Now, this is still October 2022. Now it has also significantly reduced. So as I was talking about that latency period, you have to see this on the right hand side, the security situations on the regional. You see there is a start in 2009 to 2010. There has been a start, and then it reaches a tipping point. You see these are the tipping points in 2014 and 2012. And after that, there is always a down dip to the whole scenario. And therefore, this is how you understand that the insurgency is going down. And the blue is the incidents. The extremist killed has also reduced down. And you see, I'll give you some time to go through it. So these are the stages of conflict, and I have given the example of how Northeast is going through. So before we jump into any other rule of law or understanding of what can we call as a lawfare specifically, I would like you to take 2 minutes and understand what counterterrorism or counterinsurgency models can be, right? As to how states bring in rule of law in specific, so that they can counter terrorist or counter insurgency in all the places. So take your time. So I will try to explain this particular aspect, that when we look into here, uh, whenever there is a terrorism, there is a way of how any state deals with it, whether they have to protect potential targets or and they respond it with undermining the civil liberties at some point of time for people who go against the state. And what are the agents of change? Police, private security companies, firefighters. So an act of terrorism can be anything. An act of terrorism can be how 2611 was. And this is the way how defensive countries, how countries can adopt different models of dealing with any crisis. The second aspect which deals is the reconciliatory aspect, wherein they understand that, terrorism is a political problem, but they are trying to address the root cause of the problem, and they bring in law. When you see, there is one common thing between all of these aspects is that there is always law involved in counterterrorism or counter insurgency places. And you see politicians, policymakers, brokers and diplomats, all of these are involved in this particular aspect. When we look into criminal justice as to this happens after the terrorist is caught. So arresting, punishing the terrorist according to law, and corresponding with the law, and to bring in the judicial oversight is always there. So in this, the criminal system gets involved. But when there is a war, then terrorism is an act of war. Like we have seen previously in our own country as well. And in order to eliminate terrorism through military force is of utmost importance. And therefore, the rule of law changes there. The laws of war in specific deals with the international humanitarian law. International humanitarian law deals specifically with what targets do we attack on. And sometimes there are countries which have completely ignored law completely, but military units do get involved in this. So Indian legislation at this point of time, which are used in India, is the UAPA Act, the AFSPA, the NSA, the National Security Act, the Armed Forces Special Force Act. And these are the aspects. And there are certain repealed act legislations as well, which we do not, bring out at this point of time, or they were been over abusive in the past. So in order to understand what rule of law is, we have to first understand, what are the principles behind it. And in order to understand that particular aspect of it, you need to understand and go back to what Dicey told about what is the definition of rule of law. And the rule of law can specifically, deal with the principle of all individuals, including those in position of power, must follow the same rules and regulations. You see, the supremacy of law, it specifically tells that it means that no one is above the law and everyone is subject to it. And regardless of your social status, regardless of your political influence, regardless to which party you are, the law will be fair, law will be just. And the rule of law is specifically based on ideas that law should be very clear and consistent, and it should be applied equally on all individuals. And this also means that everyone should know about these particular laws and how they are being enforced and what are the jurisdiction of people. And in a society specifically, if we look into it, that follows rule of law, or individuals and organization, if they have any issue, they always seek justice in court of laws. And the judges and the other officials are expected to be impartial and independent. This ensures that disputes are solved fairly and that everyone has been given a chance to access justice. So overall understanding is that it is a very important principle of law, and fairness, equality, and justice should be ensured for everyone, as it is one of the key foundations of democratic society per se. And various countries do not have different system of political regimes, and some may not believe in it. But in country like India, the concept of law, it has its roots in ancient Greece, and it was later propounded by a liberal political theorist as well. And um, the current extension of rule of law, it extends all the way to international developments. It involves economic and strategic as well, military international orders. And it was Aristotle who propounded this particular concept. So rule of law is very different. Now there will be another rule of law, with Chinese characteristics, or ruled by law by Chinese characteristics. I hope you must be reading a lot on China, because Professor Manoj deals with Taiwan studies as well. So I thought that why not bring this particular aspect of rule by law, is that, rule by law in China specifically, it refers to a system in which rules and regulations are used to enforce the willingness, or it is used to enforce the ruling communist parties dictates, what they dictate. It's rather than ensuring justice or protecting individual rights. They specifically believe that rule of law is very differently been practiced, and they believe that the rule of law or rule by law are lost in translation in Chinese language or Chinese Mandarin language. So under the China's rule of law, rule by law, the legal system is been tightly controlled by the Communist Party, and any dissent, it will be suppressed. It will punish those who challenge the party's authority. And in many cases, you must have seen that individuals are arrested, tried without due process of law, and they do not have access to legal representation, and the court heavily influenced by political consideration rather than legal principles. Well, even in democratic societies, we have seen this particular thing happening. If you look at how Israeli high court, Israeli justice system has been, that we have consistently seen this particular characteristics, that if a Palestinian is being tried in an Israeli court, he or she does not get a right to representation first. He or she, even if she gets a right to representation, it will be by an Israeli advocate. And third, most importantly, sometimes do not even have that particular aspect of it. So understanding this particular aspect is very important, whether it's in democratic society or not in authoritarian governments. It is important to understand what rule of law is and rule by law is. And even in addition to this, the Chinese government in specific, they believe that the legal systems are there as a tool of the society or the tool of the state for enforcing it to the society. And so that is also which gives them the power to control. It gives them the power to control the internet as well, limit free speech, and monitor the activities of what their citizens are doing in the country and abroad as well. So these laws are often used to suppress dissent and silence the critics of against the government. So overall, China's legal system may appear to be like those of other countries, but it operates within a political framework, and that prioritizes that the interest of the Communist Party always precedes over the rights and the freedom of individuals in the country. And therefore, I hope this is it. And one of the most important aspect on which is very evolving subject, and a subject which is very close to my heart as well, is the lawfare in conflict. The lawfare, it specifically aims at using law and legal system to hurt or discredit your opponent, or to stop them from reaching their own political goals. As it is seen that that rule of law has been used by Western countries, by Eastern countries, by countries all across the globe, to achieve a certain level of control in the society. And it has having an international aspect of it as well. Now the international aspect is to shape the future course of war as an alternative mean to traditional military campaigns. So regimes worldwide have now started to use law to constrain behavior of countries and contest circumstances, confuse legal precedents, and gain an advantage over the other party. And this whole concept of lawfare was first defined by Major General C. Dunlop in the year 2001, and where he used this, he debated on this particular issue that law being used as a method of warfare and a means of realizing a military objective. Now, there's a very interesting story behind why he said that it is a means of realizing a military objective, and he thought it from the perspective of the terrorist organization. So terrorist organizations such as Al Qaeda, terrorist organizations such as Taliban, and Taliban is a government, sorry, and has resorted to using civilians as a human shield against any attacks which were being used by the American forces. Um, and this specific thing led to civilians who are not even involved in the conflict getting killed. So when this started happening, in Afghanistan, uh, the local support started diminishing for the allied troops, for the allied forces in Afghanistan, and we all know what happened in 2021, that US and the allied forces had to leave. So effectively, this amounts to using civilians to deter the government or to deter the force, which is very overwhelming. Earlier, insurgents used to use guerrilla warfare in specific, so that they want to deter the forces which are more powerful to them. So now lawfare keeps the threshold of conflict less than a war, but it makes sure that during the peacetime or during war, it has been practiced by governments, it has been practiced by non-state actors, and they do not shy away from causing civilian death and casualties. So on one hand, by engaging in lawfare specifically, a state can claim that an act is conducted is legal, while a particular act of another state is illegal. You must have definitely heard about South China Sea arbitration, which was not being followed by China, even after the Permanent Court of Arbitration gave its own judgment upon it. And in other words, if you look into it, that lawfare may have a function to acquire two things in general: legitimacy and legality. When we started our presentation, we also brought in this whole concept of legitimacy and legality. So lawfare in specific, it persuades the other party to have legitimacy on specific act, and a party may even, force the other party through lawfare, while it seeks to have its own, seeks one of the two, which is legitimacy and legality. So you have to understand this particular aspect when we look into the whole Russian conflict as well. Conflict has been termed by India, but other countries like the EU and the NATO, they have termed that as a Russian invasion or Russian occupation. So the usage of word is also important and is part of the lawfare strategy which has been used by nations. So the Crimean takeover in 2014, you must have all heard about that. People in green uniform, they just appeared. They took over government buildings, and when they took over government buildings, the first aspect of them was to take over the whole place. And this, when a person is not in the uniform, when an army personnel is not in the uniform, it gives them a chance in specific to uh, not have accepted that this person is from the same country. So Russia in specific, they wanted a clause of deniability. So in case the Crimean takeover goes wrong, they can specifically claim that they are not part of they are not part of the Russian this thing, Russian army. So it's the same thing which happened in what in this the special operations, as they have termed it, that at this point of time, Russia has distributed 2 million passports in that particular region. And there's a reason as well to why they are distributing Russian passport is that once a country or once a citizen gets a passport, he or she becomes the citizen of that particular country. And when that happens, and that person has been attacked in specific, now the country can specifically claim, or country can specifically say that, see, what you have done is wrong and you have attacked my civilian. Now that is a just cause for them to go out for a war against them. And this is the one reason why they are distributing millions of passports. And the special operation per se, the word that they have used, is also in order to escape the international regimes. That is also one of the reasons why they have put special operations rather than a war. Uh, the second important aspect, or second important understanding that we have seen in the recent past is China in the South China Sea. In the South China Sea, that we have seen that Chinese maritime militia is the first militia which goes and harasses countries across the country's fishermen. And when they are being targeted upon by the other country, when they have been responded in kind by the other country, they are always been backed by the Coast Guard and the Navy behind them. So these are the tactics through which, countries have been fighting war, not even fighting war, they're continuously trying to create problems. And the Coast Guard law in specific deals with this particular aspect of it. And there, as we at this point of time see that there are the recent plenary this thing went by the Chinese Communist Party. They specifically talked about the plan on building rule of law in China from 2020 to 25, the 5-year plans. So even in that particular aspect, they talk about this particular aspect of lawfare. So if you look into this particular lawfare in conflict, it is to be stressed and seen that there are three primary characteristics of international law that we see at this point of time. Is that, international law exists in a state-based sovereign world. Every country has their own sovereignty. Secondly, that international law is specifically heavily affected by international political system. So whosoever uses the law in specific against a specific country, only then you can enforce legitimacy and you can make it legal. So whosoever has the power can do it anywhere. Third is international law in specific is very poor in its what do you call format. How do you make it implement? Like it is just like the National Human Rights Commission in our country, which may have which can suggest in certain measures, but it is not binding on the countries. Similar is the context with the international law aspect as well, that countries may decline to not accept anything about it. So China lost China lost the South China Sea arbitration against Philippines, and yet at this point of time they never decided to uh, uh, accept their particular proposal, which was been kept by the Permanent Court of Arbitration. So you see, there is a rise in this whole concept of interdisciplinary studies of international law and international relations as well. And countries, we are continuously seeing that lawfare has been becoming increasingly important as to regulating and getting the whole international relations into legality and legitimacy. So I'll go back to the whole aspect of CICT, that how each of these aspects has the legal backing towards it. So thank you so much, everyone. And uh, the floor is open for questioning. If you want to ask question. If you are not comfortable asking question, you can definitely reach out to me as well. Professor Manoj, over to you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Arpan, for this overall wonderful summarization of Lawfare at such a short time. So now I'll let the students ask you questions, and if you have any final comments after that, you can finish it. Anyone have any questions to ask? Yes, Shel.
Yeah, good afternoon, sir. My name is Shailesh, and I'm really thankful for this insightful lecture. I had one question with regards to the groups, the insurgent group and the terror group. So, can we say that when we talk about a specific group, there have been various instances where a particular group which started off as an insurgent group could lead to become a terrorist group in future. For example, let's take LTT in Sri Lanka itself, which was an insurgent group initially, but later by assassinating the former Prime Minister of India, they became a terrorist group. Or there are other examples as well. In Taliban, in Afghanistan itself, when Taliban started was an insurgent group, but later became a global terror group, as we say. So, can you say that any group, for that matter, will have a dual characteristics in themselves, and it is the situation that makes them, an insurgent group or a terror group?
It's a very excellent question, and to answer that, I would just say, as I stated in the starting, right, that an insurgent group can terrorize, and they can become a terrorist group as well. Like you yourself have stated the example. So yes, definitely. And once the borders of the country changes, and the moment a country, a state like Al Qaeda, a country, terrorist group like Al Qaeda, they start taking help from different countries abroad as well, and they start having ambitions as well. I do believe that yes, they can be, an insurgent group can become a terrorist organization for sure.
Anybody wanted to ask?
I did want to ask, good afternoon, sir. I'm Aditi. I actually had two questions. One was about at the initially when you were speaking, you were talking about how political elites can also contribute to conflict in the state. Can you explain more about how that happens? And even in the table, it's mentioned that reconciliatory, where agents are politicians and policymakers, or even diplomats. So can you explain a few examples of the same? And second question was, how successful has rule of law has been in the current situation that we see so much terrorism happening around? So how successful has this been?
Well, success. So I will first take the second question, and after that I will go ahead with the first question. So rule of law, it depends on different state and different regions. The rule of law that America wanted, or the allied forces wanted to implement in Afghanistan failed, right? But the rule of law that India wanted to bring in Northeast, or if we say in insurgency area like Punjab, well, you see the difference, right? There is a dip in insurgency in Punjab, in its non-existence, but yeah, recent cases, yes. In Northeast, I don't think so. That whole latency thing is going down. So it depends according to how and what funding as well that particular terrorist or a particular insurgency group gets. So earlier it was seen that countries such as China in specific, they have been funding NGOs in the border regions. So when this funding whenever, if you have to stop a cycle of this thing, what do you call a cycle of terrorism or cycle of insurgency, the first thing is to stop the funding aspect of it. You must have heard about the FCRA rules. The recent FCRA rules have been so stringent that now any NGO, in order to take money or foreign funding, they have to make sure that they take the approval from the government, and that becomes very critical right now. And you must have also seen that all the things have gone down. The terror aspect of it has gone down. So you see, rule of law is different in different places and according to how the country implements it as well. The first, I didn't get your question properly. You said,
So I
yeah.
just wanted to explain a little more about how agents such as diplomats and policymakers like add into terrorism or insurgencies mentioned in the data.
Okay. So you must have heard about track 2 conversations or track 1 conversations or track 1.5 conversations, right? So these conversations are a mix of government and civilians. So when these diplomats or what do you call the civilian aspect of it do come together, they make sure that this particular aspect goes down for terrorism and insurgency. If you see the example of Northeast, the negotiations between 7 states, the seven sisters had been going on from last 10 years. So each party has their own different set of agendas. When they have their own different set of agendas, the government cannot agree to everything. So this is where a negotiation specialist or a diplomat or a policymaker uh, or a politician. I don't agree with politician part, but I would say the other three definitely get involved in this particular aspect. And either they break the faction, either they break the particular political, either they break the political, what do you call, insurgency, or they make sure that the organization does not stays. So everyone has their different motivations for dealing with any of the insurgency. Like I said in the starting, right? The fault lines are very different in different societies, and fault lines are the crux of any insurgency to come by. And if you address that particular fault line, only then you would be able to have result in reducing down the terrorism or insurgency. And that is what the diplomats do as well. You must have seen the example of negotiation between India and Pakistan. The ceasefire agreement that India and Pakistan had signed upon 2 years ago. So earlier we used to have free borders, and we used to literally every day used to hear that 2 to 3 people are killed on the borders. But now, after this ceasefire agreement, which we never knew about, it was happening in the back channel talks. And when that particular thing happened, it reduced the whole thing to a very significant amount. So, see, politicians, policymakers, brokers, and diplomats play a very critical role in these aspects. And this is how the rule of law is also been. That's how they bring out change in the society as well. I hope I have answered your question.
Yes, Chris.
Good afternoon, sir. My name is Fahish. I have a question regarding the, so you mentioned that roots of conflict can be economic or political, so they can be multifaceted. Yes. So is rule of law enough to deal with the different roots of conflict? And and the second part of the question is that can these terrorism models also work in conjunction with each other, or are they almost always used singularly to address certain conflicts?
Okay, that's a good question. So roots of conflict happens when you don't have certain things, right? Every person has their own motivation, or every party has their own motivation. So rule of law, the question is if rule of law is enough. No, I don't think so the rule of law is enough for it, but it is what the government does in that particular aspect which matters more than anything else. You must have seen that the Act East policy of India specifically wants to have para-diplomacy aspect of how states deal with different nations in the Southeast Asia aspect. So now what is more important here is that it is a mix of two. It is development. Along with that, you have to make sure that rule of law works. rule of law in specific only regulates the society. But if you do not have development to support it, any problem cannot be solved, and the roots of conflict still stay. Now that what we are seeing, we have seen in Northeast is that a considerable amount of work has been done, and that is why that insurgency is reducing. When we see that insurgency is reducing, is when we understand. So if you have a chance to visit, go to this particular aspect of SDGs in Northeast and how they are being implemented, or just shoot me a mail. I have done a research specifically showing that how uh, uh, terrorism and insurgency terrorism correlates with the development which is there in the society. So you have to look at that particular aspect as well. And what was the second question?
So we have different counterterrorism models, defensive reconciliation.
Yeah.
So I sort of do not believe that you only use a single model to deal with a particular conflict. Do they work in conjunction with each other?
Yes, definitely. You cannot just have one approach to any of these issues, because since you stated in the starting, right, that it is a very complex issue and it is a multifaceted issue. And because it is a multifaceted issue, you have to use different models at different times. There are times when the government has to, negotiate. And there are times when the government is on the offensive. They will be like, see, we have these aspects and you have to listen to these aspects. So as you have correctly stated that counter-terrorism models per se, they work in conjunction. You cannot just have one thing specifically. You can have 2 to 3 or even more than that in different aspect of it, because you are not just dealing with one particular party. You may be dealing with 3 to 4 political parties or different parties which may be having their own insurgent this thing. So one of the most important aspect in Northeast is 32 different parties were engaging with the government at one point of time. And these are the insurgency groups which have been working and operating in different states altogether. Like this is, they are not just specified to one region, and in different region, they are having their different interests. And the government is engaging with both of them with different models. So again, you cannot just have one simple straight approach. You need to have multi-pronged approach to deal with any insurgency or any terrorist models or to any altogether. I hope I have answered your question.
I'm just Kiran Gujral. So I had one question regarding the combatancy or combating insurgency. So in this country, we've seen many examples of success and failure. Success, I would point to the combating the Punjab insurgency by one main man was usually pointed out, the DG KPS Gill. And his policies in Punjab led to the extreme reduction of insurgency in Punjab. Now, this I would ask, how is it different, or why can we not replicate these type of examples in areas such as perhaps Kashmir or Chhattisgarh or even the Northeast, or for example, or even an international example? How can countries not replicate this type of idea in other areas where they're trying to combat insurgency?
So it's a good question, but you have to understand that left-wing extremism is in Chhattisgarh. That is a very different problem altogether. Insurgency is in only 2 regions in our country, or used to be in 2 regions in our country. You have rightly stated that KPS Gill was one of the instrumental figure in bringing down the Punjab Khalistani insurgency. But you have to understand that societies are different. Because the societies are different, you have to have a different approach altogether. You cannot have one particular set of approach and you can deal with that particular aspect everywhere. There is no straight-jacketed formula or an approach to dealing with insurgency. Like the insurgency that we see in Jammu Kashmir is very different from what insurgency we see in Northeast and what insurgency we used to see in the times of Punjab, right? So there is no straight-jacketed formula per se. And it's always about, again, every society has their different fault lines, and to understand what is their fault line matters more than, and the terrorist organizations, they do understand this particular aspect. So now it is our duty to, fill that particular fault lines of these particular these particular people. And you must have already seen that how Punjab insurgency went down. It was because when the locals stopped supporting this whole Khalistani movement. And it is going down in Northeast because of the simple reason that they understand this thing that with violence, there is no, you cannot grow, or your country cannot, your state cannot grow. And you have to understand this aspect, and there is no straightjacketed formula to it. Yeah. Yes. Next.
So my question is based more on state sponsor or state terrorism, because the model that you've shown here, it's particularly for non-state actors involved in terrorism. How do we deal, or like how does, say, if you're talking about international level, so humanitarian law and human rights law, how does the international level or even at regional level do countries or even organizations deal with state-sponsored terrorism or state-based terrorism?
So a very interesting case study came up in Jammu Kashmir. I had recently had the chance to go there, and the money used to come from Saudi Arabia and Pakistan, and to specific people in the valley. And then they used to fund that particular aspect. They used to fund terrorism in all small different pockets of the valley. So firstly, in order to combat such things, in order to combat such cross-border terrorism or these things, what really matters is to cut down the source of money, right? FCRA rules, as I stated earlier, is one. The second approach is, to have a border, or like we may have different borders. Like, for example, if you see the Israel and Palestine issue as well. So they, either you develop your offensive so good that you develop your defensive so good that the terrorist organizations are not able to breach it. Like we have seen photos of Iran Dome, which was used when Hamas in specific, they were starting to bomb in specific areas of Israel. So either, first of all, you develop your defense capability to that level. Secondly, you have to follow the international humanitarian laws. International humanitarian laws have specific codes as well, specific way to how you deal with people who are not from your own country, but they are involved in they're involved in the different conflicts, right? Like how we have brought down between India and Pakistan. So there are various ways to deal with it. Cutting down the funding, I do believe, is one of those. And secondly is that getting your borders better is also one of those reasons, one of those points where, I think can be brought in. Yes.
Good morning, sir. My name is Yugam. This is kind of a follow-up question on the answer you gave about KP Singhal. So I totally agree with the point that societies are different, and probably that's why those methods were not used in other areas of insurgency. But do you think that also it wasn't used in other areas because of the repercussions which were faced by Punjab police after what KP Singhal did? Because we also know that once like his war on terror in Punjab ended, there were many cases and CBI probes against the Punjab police because of the steps he took and the number of disappearances in police custody which happened because of his charge in Tarun. And do you think it was a fair way of dealing with whatever was happening in Punjab in 1991, or could it have been like more better in terms of humanitarian, in terms of the humanitarian aspect of it?
Okay, so first of all, I do believe that any police should always be accountable, no matter what, right? Any police or any forces should be accountable and should be accountable for anything and everything that they do. Yes, the things that you said that can be handled better. Yes, definitely they can be handled better. Always, there's always a case, but you have to understand what are the scenarios of that particular time period. Police were being killed. People across the country were being killed, and there were large scale of riots. And I do believe that at that particular point of time, it becomes very difficult for police forces to uh, uphold the rule of law. But yes, uh, due accountability always comes up, and the disappearance case. The last recently, if I am not wrong, just few days ago, I was reading up a report wherein it specifically said that in Jammu Kashmir, there was an army captain who had killed 3 people, and on the account that he stated that it was a terrorist, that the person were terrorist, and he has come from cross border. There was an SIT investigation which was been set up by the army, and in that particular case, he has been given this thing. He has been given uh, lifetime imprisonment because what he did was wrong. So there are correct judicial checks and balances in our system, which definitely looks at all of these things. It's just that it takes time, but eventually it will be out. As in our own law, and in law we say that nothing is black and white, everything is in gray. So that's why we lawyers always wear black and white clothes, so that we can deal with gray. So yes, our whole pursuit is all about dealing with the gray, and after one point of time, the truth definitely comes out. Yes.
So I think we can wind up this session, Mr. Arpan. And I would like to thank Mr. Arpan also for this wonderful discussion on roots of conflicts, insurgency, ASPA, lawfare and conflict, and answering to these wonderful questions of the students as well.